And that is our two pastors, Nathan and Pat. So they have courageously and creatively gotten us through the past 2 years, and it was a challenge. So today we're going to hear some reflections from them and some insights and some hope for the future. But before I turn it over to them, I would like to ask that you all remain just a little bit, those of you in the class, remain a little bit at the end and give us some feedback. We'd like to hear what you'd like to have for classes in the future and how you've felt about the series that we've just presented. So please stick around if you can. And so now I'll turn it over to Pat and Nathan.
Thank you. Oh, I got one.
Oh, that's right.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you to our adult education team. If you're a member of the adult ed team, would you stand?
Yay.
And thank you. I think this has been a really a very significant, a very valuable series for our church, and it takes a lot of work to wrangle people to speak and to plan out a series like this. So thank you for that. And also, from the balcony, David and Jeff, for live streaming this, and for the sound, thank you. And they didn't know this, but today's not about us. They're actually going to lead the... Is that you? Yeah. Oh no, that would be good. But it has been a really significant series. It's been wonderful to be reminded of some of the challenge that we have experienced and endured as a congregation, and to pull out some of those threads, I think, that really needed to be lifted up, and to know that in the midst of those, to look back and see God's presence walking with us, and the very real sense of hope that we have as a people of faith. And so a lot, when I started thinking about this, a lot of this was kind of living together in a cloud. When I looked back to the start of the pandemic and when things really progressed here, when our church began making decisions in response to the pandemic, all of that seems very long ago. And so it took a little bit to figure out and to pull different pieces of from that time to begin to make sense of it. And I'm probably not the only one who looks back on the past year and a half or so and has trouble kind of making some, or bringing some sense of order and kind of remembering things in a linear fashion. If you recall, the timing for us in our church was right around the beginning of March. And I looked back into my emails, and one of the first things I noticed was, and I don't think Judy's here, that George Regan, many of you know George, a beloved member of the church, was beginning his decline in his health. And so that was one of the first things that I noticed, and when I looked back on my calendar and my email inbox, I was noticing different things that stood out. And then on March 15th was the first day that we had that we didn't have service, and that's when we shifted everything to a live stream. We did it very quickly and found a way to be church, to share church virtually in a time when we couldn't be in person. It was an exciting time. If we say if we were to identify one of the gifts that the pandemic has given us, is that it's forced us to make some changes, and one of them being having a live stream. And so in about 4 days, we figured out what it would take to have a live stream and put together all the pieces, hardware, software, programs, cameras, all those things together so that we could offer a worship service virtually. And it's hard. It's hard to look back on our early offerings because we've come such a long way. It's so much better now. It's amazing how far we've come. But there were several of those first Sundays when we offered a live stream. You'd see Kathy leading a children's sermon, and her voice would be like in a baritone, you know? Or the sound would jump here and there. And we've learned the hard way very quickly. But that is one of the gifts that we have received from the pandemic. We push forward on a few things and have that going forward as a gift to the church, as a blessing to our community of faith. One of the biggest things as a pastor, and then I'm going to, after this, I'm going to stop and then let you speak a little bit. Sorry. One of the hardest things about the pandemic was the sense of uncertainty. How many times did we say, we don't know, I don't know, I don't know?
All the time.
All the time. And we really weren't comfortable. We aren't comfortable as a culture. We aren't comfortable really saying, I don't know. I don't have the answers. But for a long period of time, we were forced to wrestle and really rely on that as our response. I don't know. I don't know how long we will not be able to worship in person. I don't know how long we will have to wear masks. I don't know. Is what we're doing really working? I don't know. I don't know. And to circle back, and maybe a theme of today, and I think it's very much in line with hope. Maybe it would be more the gifts of the pandemic. There's something very good about a sense of uncertainty in the church. We were invited as a congregation, all churches were really invited to reclaim a sense of uncertainty. And if you really boil that down, we believe, we have faith, we have this sense of trust in something bigger than ourselves. We believe that God is at work in all of life. That in its essence, to have faith as a people of God, involves uncertainty. There must be some uncertainty. There must be some, a large aspect of letting go and trusting in God. And so it's been, I've kind of come around from those many months of saying I don't know, and not feeling comfortable saying that, to identifying that as a vital and good and significant aspect of our faith. Because we believe God is walking with us. We don't know what tomorrow will bring, but we know that God's going to be a part. Stop.
So I thought what I would do to begin is just tell you where I started. and then you can add. This is where Nathan and I personally were at when the pandemic hit. You know, oftentimes I think it's easy to just see the pastor here and forget that we have this whole other big messy life going on outside of this. So the week before the pandemic hit, I was actually in central Iowa. I was at the hospital where my mother had been admitted. I got a phone call that said, this might be it, you need to come down. And I did, and she was not doing well in the hospital, but while she was in the hospital, she started to get better and better. Now, also at this time, I was on like my 3rd month of bronchitis. So I was coughing, which, if you remember back then, and it's so hard to remember back then, but back then, if you had a cough, if you had a sniffle, everybody went, do you have COVID? Do you have COVID? So I'm in the hospital room with her, and I am coughing into a pillow all the time. And I stayed with her, and my plan was to be there the week and not be in church on Sunday. And she got better, and so they said, we're going to send her back to the care facility. And I said, okay, I'll get in my car. And I got to the care facility, which is maybe, 5 minutes away. I walked to the care facility, and I reached for the door just as I heard it slam shut, the bolt. They bolted it, and I'm like, let me in, and I'm on the camera, and they know me there, and they said, Pat, we just shut down the facility for COVID. And I go, that's great, but where is my mother? I had no idea where she was. And if you remember at this time, we had already learned that COVID was decimating nursing homes, especially in Washington State, Oregon, out there. 30 at a time. And you would hear that 15 died, 30 died. And so this care facility was locking down, and I had no idea where my mother was. And I said, I'm not leaving here till you tell me that you've got her. And they said, let me check, because you're irritating us. So she was okay, and I walked out of the building, and I stood, and I'm like, well, there's absolutely nothing I can do. And so I texted Nathan and said, Nathan, I guess I'll be there on Sunday. And so then I drove home. After that, I had a recurring nightmare. And my nightmare was I was watching my mother walking down, she was ahead of me, and I was watching her walk down the middle of a railroad tracks into an oncoming freight train. And there was nothing I could do about it. Nothing. And so that's where I started from. And that's why when I got back, I said to Nathan, you handle the technology, I'll handle the people. And so the first thing we did is we had a list. We realized that as a church, we are called to do things a little differently. We are called to love God and love one another, especially those that are the most vulnerable. And so that's what we did from a pastoral care, congregational care standpoint. We started looking at our most vulnerable. Who do we have in our care facilities that are now locked down? Who do we have that are living alone at home? Who are our 90-year-olds? Who are our 80-year-olds? Who has no family around? Who are those members of our congregation that are older, that are on the margins, kind of on the fringes? And we had a list of 101 people. And that's where we started. And then we just divided and conquered. The elders took some of those names. The deacons took those names. The membership team took some of those. Staff took some of those. And we divided up the 101. And those people, we all were to make contact with them, check in with them, see how they're doing, phone calls, send cards, this sort of thing. And all of this happened in a matter of days. And the thing that I remember most clearly back then is just how quickly we had to completely pivot. And you're not very good about talking about yourself in very positive way, because you would not imagine what had to happen in order to go from 0 to live streaming in 4 days. It was amazing. You know, staff bought the lights that we had. We made our own little studios in our houses. We did a lot of things like that. But so that's where we started. I have my mother who was in a care facility. I had my daughter who was in her senior year of college that had worked so hard, and it was months before we could celebrate that, and they shut down, and all her friends had to leave. She ended up graduating in our hotel room. So that, and then my husband has an underlying health condition. So we have all of this stuff going on. You have 3 boys that are now home because they did shut down the schools. You have a wife who's in the middle of all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm a handful myself. So
on a good day.
On a good day.
Yeah.
It was hard to at first. Well, there was a honeymoon period where we're like, oh, this is great. We get to spend more time together. Things are slowing down. We can kind of, this is good. But then it really just caught up. And, with 3 boys, caught up to us, 3 boys on top of each other, largely in the house for too long. Trying to navigate a distance learning kind of platform that was really not thoroughly worked out in itself. I'm very grateful for the teachers and the administrators and all the work they did, but there were some bugs along the way, and it was hard. And honestly, as tech savvy as I pridefully claim myself to be, I was not much help to my boys in the education aspect of it. I was more trying to keep everyone sane and safe and from hurting each other. I started to notice how much the social aspect of life matters, especially for my young children, and how much it affected them in a negative way, not having the chance to see their friends, not having the chance to interact in a very profound way. One of the, I started talking about a gift of the pandemic. One was uncertainty. Another one was really working through what it means to worship without people.
Yeah.
It is hard. I don't take it for granted, especially now, when there's a congregation in the pews, and the chance for us to worship together in person. It is amazing how much that makes a difference. And it's hard as leaders to stand up and look out, and we did our best to imagine. You remember we put people on the pews because it's hard. There's, I'd say my whatever jokes whatever bad jokes I might have, that usually just get a little murmur. And then without people, there was complete silence. Mm-hmm. And just there's something very powerful and necessary about the community of faith coming together in person to sing, to pray, to share together. And when we don't have that, worship becomes more of it became more of a task. And so we all throughout the time that we were not in person, we wrestled with that. We pushed up against that, trying to make it feel like a work of the people, a shared work of our team. At one point, that's why when we started worship, our live stream, you could see us, the 6 of us were in comfy chairs, big chairs up here, because we needed that corporate sense. We needed that sense of togetherness. And then whenever things really progressed, the pandemic progressed, then we shifted to staying at home and having fewer staff members come into the office. We had, I think, Dale and Chandra and maybe Jennifer continued to come.
Yeah, Chandra and Dale for sure were always here.
But the rest of us really, we were trying to limit the number of people coming into the office. And so we ended up doing Zoom worship, So we would gather together at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night, and we would have all of our liturgy and prepared, and we'd highlight and whose name would say what part, and we would go through and then after a quick run through or practice, we would record it. And and we felt, for 1 or 2 Sundays or 3 or 4, that worked out really well. And then we started to miss being together, and it was really hard to lead worship from our homes. And so, I often think of that passage where Jesus says, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, I am there with you. That really has taken on great meaning now. And that's been, Sunday mornings are a gift. Every chance that we have to gather together and share company in worship is a gift. Yeah.
We were trying to remember, like, what did we do for Easter that year? What did we do? And we were at the staff meeting, and oh yeah, that's right. Do you remember how weird it was when it was just us sitting up here trying to celebrate Easter Sunday with nobody out there? And I remember when we were done with that service, we all just kind of stood there going, we know it's Easter, but this is the weirdest Easter ever. And then when we started to Zoom, it was late at night because Ben had to get his kids to bed. So it was like 8 o'clock when we started. I'll tell a story. Kathy Dauma and I would just, wherever we would respectively not get ready till like 7 o'clock. And then we'd go into makeup and we'd go into wardrobe, we'd take a shower, we'd get our hair done, we'd put makeup on, and we're gonna record. And it was just so odd. Did you do that at all?
All of this is no makeup. All of this. Yeah.
But just those little things that were so weird. So while all this technical stuff was going on then too, we were trying to care for this congregation, this very large congregation. And not only did we divide up our most vulnerable that we started to take care of, at that time, you might not remember, but at that time, we had 5 members in hospice care. And so this is some of the really cool things that came out of this. There was the deacons who said, what if we just plastered their windows with hearts? And so, I don't know who, somebody cut out like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different shaped hearts and filled up big envelopes. And several of the deacons then wrote a message on every single one of those hearts, every single one. And then we did a lot of that ding dong dash thing. And they took those to how, if you don't think this was a big deal, ask Terry Keel, ask Denny Graber. And they got these hearts and they opened them up, and here was a message, hundreds of these hearts with messages from members of the church. And I remember I went to Ruth Graber's house. Her service was actually in her backyard, and those hearts were plastered on her front window. They were at Terry Keel's house also. And a member of the deacons came up with that idea. There were so many little things that happened that were just so hopeful in a very dark, scary time. We had some meals here, but we had needs come in that we never would have expected. And there was a member of the congregation that said, here's a check, and use it for whatever. And with that, Nathan and I were able to focus on specific needs that some of the members of our congregation have, instead of saying, we have some casseroles here. No, I need this. Okay, here's this. And I need this. And all the way from food, which was a really big need, to trying to figure out how to do things at home with their kids, so school things, and then when it was hard for some students to be at home, we paid for some help for some of those kids. It was just amazing what we were able to do then. I forgot a lot of what we did, so I actually pulled the deacon minutes. I pulled the annual report that the deacons had from 2019 to 2020. It is 5 pages long. Even the one last year 3 pages long. I pulled our monthly newsletter articles just to remember the things that we did. We had small groups for Advent and Lent. We had at least 9 small groups. And so how do you do that? Well, I had a personal Zoom account. You had a personal Zoom account. The church had a Zoom account. Eric had a Zoom account. The youth had a Zoom account. There was another member that had a Zoom account. And we were able then to do that because suddenly people are going, well, I have a Zoom account. I can do that. A member brought in just a handful of Hy-Vee gift cards and said, hand these out as you need. The deacons had, they delivered Advent booklets and little goodie bags to all of our homebound and shut-ins, I think there were 40, and they did that for Advent, they did that for May Basket Day, they had Valentine's Day. This is deacons plus the membership team. Sorry, Judy, I forget. It's the membership team and the deacons were like solid in everything they did in reaching out to all of our members. There's so much that went on. People were delivering meals to other people. For those that didn't feel comfortable on Zoom, I remembered I have this freeconferencecall.com. So we started like a party line for some of our older members, and I started a group, Deb Moore started a group, Linda Palmer started a group, and they would just call each other, and these older people would be, oh, this is just like a party line, and they'd just gab on the phone, and it was easier. We really tried to meet people where they were at. And I could go on and on and on about all the things that members of this congregation did to reach out. We haven't even talked about what Neighborhood Care did. The sewing women, right away, there was a need for masks, right? And the need first came from the hospitals, of all places, Sanford and so these sewing women were like, what did they end up making, like 1,500 masks or some, how? 2,000? 3,000? You made 3,000 masks. And then they made them for kids, and they made them for a number. And then when Smithfield happened, you remember that outbreak? Neighborhood Care went to one of the stores, a mattress store, one of them, who had just pivoted to making masks. And we bought like $5,000 worth of masks that then were distributed to the neighborhood around Smithfield. They went to police stations. They went several places. We determined which members of our congregation were in the healthcare profession. We got little, we love our healthcare, and we went around and stuck them in their yards. And we did the same thing for teachers. We had window thing for teachers. Different ways to support, just so much. There's just so much that went on to care for the members of the congregation, but also those outside our walls. Just
Yep.
Do you need the microphone? Oh,
Judy said the program with the younger kids writing letters to our older.
oh my
kids.
gosh, that was so much fun. You know, and that was, one of the things that happened when COVID hit and you switched to adaptive kind of leader. Your brain goes like nuts. And it was actually very exciting because everything is so different. Your brain is like, I don't know what's going on, but what if we do this? The ideas, the creativity that came out, what if we do this? Sure. What if we do this? Of course. It was, and so one of the things is, little kids, who doesn't like getting mail? And little kids, I don't think, get mail. But it was so much fun. So I called up Cruz and I said, Jean, you have any of our older people that might like to write letters to these little kids? And in half an hour, she had 15. And they were all 80 and 90-year-olds. She had 15 of them. And then I'm talking to Kathy Dalma, what do you got? She says, I got 60. I'm like, ooh. Ooh. And I said, Jean, how many kids do you think our older folks would want to write to? And they're going, what do you got? And I said, what if they had 4 apiece? And she was like, well, yeah. I mean, Jean. And this was to go on for a month. And they'd write, every week the older person would write, and then and the kids loved it so much, they said, can we have another 2 months? And our older people said, yeah, heck. And so they did. For 3 months, every week, all those 15 older members of our congregation wrote letters to these kids. And the connections and the stories that you hear are amazing. In fact, when Cruz died, Jack Golden was sitting right over there. He was right here. Yep. It's amazing, the hope, the caring, the love, because we are called to live differently in the church. We are called to love God, love one another, especially those that are the most vulnerable. And during this time, it started out, our older people were clearly the most vulnerable. And then our kids became so vulnerable. And then it was like all the rest of us, because we all became caregivers in one way or the other. And we all had stories. We all had somebody in our lives that was touched by this. No one in this congregation got COVID from the church. We had members that did have COVID, but we were able to keep COVID out of the building, which I think is remarkable. Remarkable.
It is. I'm going to keep going with my theme, gifts of pandemic. Another gift of the pandemic was facing my fear of failure, right? Pat did, and the deacons did, our teams did a great job leading the way, reaching out and caring for people. And yet I feel like, well, it's always the one or two or three that you tend to focus on, those whose expectations or needs, for whatever reason, you're not able to meet. And then I wrestled feeling like we didn't do enough. And I'm not saying that we should have done more, but people, it's the people who fell through the cracks. It's the people that we either didn't know about or didn't reach out to in their time when they needed someone when they needed the pastor to call them. And that is hard for me to hear. I don't like failure, and so I look back on that time with some, I don't know what would be the right word. I guess there's a little bit of hurt there, not from anyone, but just from, I don't like that we failed in some ways. And it's unrealistic. It's an unrealistic expectation I place on myself. And I get that. But I don't like failing. I don't like that people felt disconnected. I had no idea what it was like to go through a pandemic. I tried to listen to podcasts that explained the pandemic of polio and what that was like, how people responded, where they found hope. But we really, this was unprecedented.
No, it just reminded me of a story. Go ahead.
Okay, all right.
Go ahead.
What I'm grateful for in the midst of all of that, trying to reach out to people that we, beyond the 101, who are the people beyond the 101 that we needed to reach out to. And then with the start of fall, there was a shift. When programs started again and Sunday schools, adult ed started, we were built, kind of amping up some programs. And then there was a shift, and I began to feel like we were starting to move, that we were starting to reach people, and that was the start of fall was a shift, a very hopeful shift for me, because it helped kind of combat and press up against all those places where I feel like we could have done better. The other part of the other gift of the pandemic was I used to think that I could listen longer than anyone could talk. I still kind of think that, but there are pandemic rules where there are exceptions, and I have never seen people so polarized. Mm-hmm. I still kind of feel like I can bring people together, I can listen, we can engage, and we can still be friends at the end. Boy, this last year and a half was trying. And I'm sure you experienced this in your own life, in your families, but in the church, there were really hard extremes that, regardless of my response or our response, I feel like there was nothing we could say that would lead to an outcome that was a win for us, for me, or for the church. So that was...
That's a really good point that you raise, is we, sorry.
Us, we.
I don't mean to speak for you.
Yo, please.
I do frequently, but that fear of missing somebody was always in the back of our head. And even though we started with this list of 101, pretty soon that got down to 70, because there were people on that list that said, I'm okay, focus on somebody else. Jean Cruz, the story I was going to say, Jean Cruz, when I would first visit her, she said, I lived through World War II and the Great Depression, we're fine. And she said something that I will never forget. She said, during World War II, she said, we didn't know when that was going to end or how that was going to end. With this pandemic, in a way, we know it will end, and we know how it will end. And she found great peace and hope in that. And that for me anyway, was very reassuring that, yeah, we're going to get through this, and our older people are going to be okay. That freight train dream went away then, actually. But that was a fear. The other thing I would like to add, during this time, I was also working on a dissertation and graduating myself. And one of the things that happened to me is I actually was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease just before I graduated. Actually, I was recording. Jeff and Judy Little were helping me record my defense. So my oral dissertation, I had to do a 20-minute, and I was slurring my speech and not knowing what was going on. Jeff and Judy graciously edited my dissertation to cut out those parts, and I don't know how he did it, but it actually flowed really well, and you could not tell. But I also have this droopy eye thing. I was diagnosed with myasthenia gravis, which explains now my thymoma and a bunch of other things. But because I have this autoimmune disease, now it makes things like masking more important for me. And I am so grateful, because if you've noticed, whenever Nathan sits near me, even though I am triply vaccinated, Nathan will have his mask on. And so most of the staff had to kind of learn, they were very sensitive to this new little weird diagnosis that I had. But the whole mask issue has been unbelievable. Mm-hmm. But I am grateful for those that are willing to wear a mask around me like you do. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
But jeepers, yeah. It's a mask.
I know.
That was an added little bonus that happened during the pandemic.
And the one final thing, I see you're readying the mic.
Yes.
So that means that our time...
We could go on for hours.
Another gift of the pandemic is the words of acknowledgement and encouragement have meant so much. And gosh. And I'm not going to say any names, so I don't want to embarrass anybody. But there are one or two people who, and I don't want you to do this necessarily, but there are one or two people who, after every sermon, after every time of worship, regardless of how poor my sermon is, and there's some good ones and there's some bad ones, right? That's just the nature of the beast. They'll come up to me and say, "That was such a lovely sermon," mm-hmm. and I'll say, "Well, thank you." I'm not sure that we were in the same sanctuary, but mm-hmm. But it's those even from just folks popping their head in our doors mm-hmm. and saying, "Hey, I just want you to know you're doing a good job. And thank you for what you're doing. And I found myself kind of stirred by those encouragements in a way that I hadn't before, and grateful. And I started trying to be more aware of my own ability and opportunity to offer those kind of same words to other people, and to pop in or walk by and say, hey, that was awesome. Good job. And
You did a very good job of that also, of keeping the morale of staff up during, well, I guess we're still in it, but through those especially early days where really we had no idea what we were doing, but very, very permission giving and very positive, and try it, do it.
yeah.
Before you do it, there's just one, I want to just read one little thing. I wrote this in some annual report somewhere, but I wrote, we are in the midst of a global pandemic that is agonizing for so many of us. But 100 years from now, when someone is rummaging through the church archives and finds the annual report for 2020, they will see how FPC weathered this storm. We kept the faith, we relied on God, we did it together, and we did it because Jesus calls us to love one another and care for those who are vulnerable, no matter the discomfort it may bring us. COVID is upon us for a season. Loving one another is what we do for a lifetime. Well done, FPC, well done.
If there are any questions that you would like to offer to ask?
You haven't mentioned perhaps a worrisome note about the financial contribution since we were no longer here. That had to be on your mind.
That and the budget cut and the personnel.
Yeah. Last February, we had to make significant changes to our staff and to some overall expenditures in the life of the church, and they hit us pretty hard. They were dramatic, and in response, the staff had to kind of rally a little bit and take on different responsibilities. I'm doing different things on Sunday morning than I used to, because I have to, in a way, and we all are. And that's really a pretty awesome thing to see in your staff and in your church staff, folks that pool together and say, yeah, I'll do that. I don't want to, but I will. And it was challenging to pull the Good Samaritan Fund from 12 to 10. One of my hopes when I first started a few years ago was to continue pushing that number up as the years went by, that we would go from 10 to 11 to 12 to 13, 14. And sooner or later that, the goal would be, what if we had as much money going out as we had coming in? So that was a hard cut. But it was remarkable how the church responded when we sent out the letter in June saying, this is where we are. And we've been able to survive. We've made these cuts. We've adapted. We've adjusted. We're able to function. But if we can't meet the financial obligations where we are now going forward, the next few cuts will hurt. And I meant that, and I was trying to imagine what that would be like. I didn't like the thought of that at all. And the church responded in an amazing way. And John Ulmer, I'm grateful for his work on the finance team and his ability to understand overall financial well-being of the church and translate it to us, to me. After we sent that letter out, and in the next few weeks and months to come, John made the statement several times, "I've never seen this before," in the positive, and that just blew me away. The challenge there, anytime we talk about money, we're always a little hesitant to do so. The challenge there is to keep going our momentum. We hope that the congregation sees where we are, and how far we've come as a tremendous positive, and continues to invest in our future, and that we don't that we don't allow ourselves to go back, but we continue to press forward with hope and anticipation that what we're doing here, that there's something good that we're doing, that God's at work in what we're doing, and to keep going. I know that was probably more than what you, I'm sorry. That's the danger when you give two pastors the microphone.
I really appreciate you guys being so very real. But one of the realities that we all can notice is that we've lost people. Some are choosing to Zoom, but we have lost some significant people. How do you deal with that?
In 2019, we had 10 deaths. 2020, we had 16. 2021 so far, 7. Only one that was COVID enhanced. That's
But I'm just talking about number of people
right.
out here.
Yeah, it's
That's a great question. You know, and connected to that, closely related, is the question of, what in the world is happening in denominational churches today? And it's not, we're not unique in the sense that denominational churches are kind of on the downward slope, and younger folks aren't flocking to the church in a way. And this is no news, right? We've recognized this trend for some time. I think there's how do we deal with that going forward? There's a sense of gratitude that we are where we are, and I'm grateful for what we're able to do, and a sense of just that God is not done yet. I have no idea. It's the uncertainty picture. I have no idea what the church will be like in 5 years, what the church will be like in 10 years. It will be, it will be transformed in a way that I don't know. But I know that there will still be people who will want and feel called to do the work that God calls them to do. And I think there's comfort there. There's great comfort knowing that the church, the church will continue regardless of how many people we have in the pews. It will look different, but God will still be working through us, through the church, in a powerful and meaningful way. And I'm foolish in a lot of ways. I'm a stubborn optimistic. That's why I think I can listen longer than most people can talk. I believe that at any and every opportunity that there is reason for us to be hopeful for our future, and on any given day that there will be 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 people who come into our doors who have never been in our church before, and so I don't know what the future will hold. But I'm optimistic, stubbornly so, that we will continue on what started in 1883.
1883. One of the things that we talk about is just the spiritual growth that we have seen in people. And that's one of the really fun things about our job is when we go, did you see the new people that went to Laundry with Love? Or we have people that are showing up at the food distribution, and just the growth in one's spiritual life is what excites me. I firmly believe there will always be a First Presbyterian Church. It probably won't look like this, but you will have faithful people who are growing spiritually, reaching out to one another, and serving the community. God's at work.
But in this big building? But in this huge facility?
And that's a question that we often come around to. There are conversations that we circle around in and among our meetings and session. Yeah, that's a reality. This is a big building. Pat will often say it was built for a church of 1,500,
Yeah.
right?
1,400 in the 1970s.
Yeah. And so what does that mean? Does that mean that we need to look at other buildings? I don't know. Does that mean that we need to be creative in how we utilize our space and how we bring other people in to rent or use our space? Definitely. And we're starting to see more and more of that. But again, it's the sense that I'm. We don't know.
We've come full circle because you started with I don't know, and we're still at I don't know.
We still are there.
Yeah.
But and that is so hard to breathe uncertainty back into the church, right? If we think about how much we have programmed the church, how much we have kind of solidified our understanding of how life and faith should be. Mm-hmm. There was a whole heck of a lot more uncertainty in the early first century in so many areas of life, and yes, in the church, and to breathe that back in is a gift and a challenge, as long as we work through it and bring what we know of God and faith and our larger story.
I think with that, we need to let them go a little bit because they've got another service to take care of. But one thing I would ask of everybody in the congregation and online that are watching, I know we have people that watch during the week, the class that happened. Be sure, and if you have questions or a little gripe or whatever, please don't just keep it to yourself. They are very open to discussion. Bring it to the people that can do something about any pain, any hopes, any whatever you have, so that we can keep our conversations fresh and relevant and helpful. And next Sunday, like Pastor Nathan said, we are going to be meeting in the lounge, and it's a video and discussion, and it's of the Holy Land, so you'll get to see actual places, and it's a group of people. Some are agnostic, some are atheists, some are Christians, some are Jewish, and they take this journey together, and they have discussions about the experiences of the places where they go to the sepulcher, where they go to where, Jesus was born. And it's just kind of a dropping off point for us to re-examine things that we think happened during Christmas, and when did it actually happen? Was it summer? Was it winter? It's just kind of a good thing. So we're going to be having that in the lounge, but unfortunately, because of copyright issues, It will not be live streamed, so if you want to take part in this, you do have to physically move your body to church. So, with that, thank you very much.
Thank you.